I'm Gordon Brooks, Executive Chairman of Zixi, and I have two esteemed colleagues here, or friends and partners. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Tim Stevens, a global leader of strategic innovation, media and entertainment space for Verizon.
And I'm Grant Odin from the National Hockey League.
Awesome. We're going to play a short video, just kind of give you a little idea what Zixi's up to, and then we'll get right into it.
Nice.
Okay, so we're going to actually talk about a really interesting use case and a pilot we did with Verizon, some other partners with the NHL at NAB, but it's kind of an ongoing thing. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong. So we did something that was very unique. I'm going to ask Tim to talk about it technically, and then I'll ask Grant to talk about it from a business perspective and why he wants to do it and why we did it. But we did a number of firsts, right?
Yep.
So we were, I believe, the first to use 5G to bring a live sporting event into a wavelength zone, into the edge.
Yep.
We were the first to transcode in a wavelength zone. We were first to transcode into NDI in a wavelength zone. And we were the first to fully produce a live sporting event in a wavelength zone, and then use 5G to bring it to show people at NAB, and all the production was done on the floor of NAB in the Verizon booth. Am I right?
Yep.
Any other firsts?
No, I think that's enough.
Okay.
Well, I think it was the first actual live broadcast entirely produced on the show floor in NAB.
Okay, that's another.
That's probably
question.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So Tim, you want to tell us a little
Sure.
bit about kind of what we did technically, the partners involved, the roles they played, things like that?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously with NHL is a great partner, and you guys at Zixi. We also had VizRT, Evertz, AWS, of course, and if I'm missing anybody, we'll throw them in, we'll throw them in later. I mean, the challenge was, and look, we're seeing it all the time, contribution feeds, getting them out of venues, getting them into a more efficient workflow, and then being able to use a remote production staff to pull this together. But more importantly, doing it in a macro network, our public network, which was really probably the biggest challenge for all. Right. So we, technically what we were able to do is we brought, via Zixi, we brought some live streams into a cloud-based environment, which is at our edge compute infrastructure. There we launched several work streams, VizRT doing all the technical production, Evertz doing replay, and then graphics also being done by VizRT, and then composing in real time, literally cutting a show, and then pushing it out from a program feed onto the floor of NAB. And from my perspective, we were delivering it, and we did some side-by-side tests. We were probably delivering a live show that was 7 to 8 seconds sooner in terms of its delivery live to the floor than anybody across America was watching that show.
It was sub 3 seconds, like all the way through.
Yeah. So if you were watching it at your set-top box at home or whatever device you're using, you were clearly not seeing what we were seeing for another 7 or 8 seconds, or balanced from there. And then, as you were saying, Grant, the other really interesting thing as well is that we were using NDI as the interface in between, cutting and managing the video, but then also transcoding it immediately into HLS and pushing it down to devices, mobile devices on the floor, which is absolutely another first. And I think, if I recall, it was like 18 to 20 seconds sooner than the NHL app that was on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, really the impressive part of this whole thing is really we're taking Zixi feeds natively directly from that we're encoding at the arena, delivering them to the edge, They're getting transcoded and circled back in a way where you could actually have people on mobile devices in the venue getting a live produced feed of that game that's less than a second behind the actual
Real time.
actual real time.
Yeah.
So it's actually finally like something that you could usefully watch the game and then look down and see a replay almost immediately, and it's not jarring and you're waiting for it, right? And I think that was the important part about you stressing out the 5G aspect of this, was that when I'm pushing these encodes out of the building, you got, for so long, many years, we're doing multiple encodes of the same feed for different purposes. And really this gets us to the one feed to rule them all kind of territory, where we are just making one contribution to the cloud, and that's basically getting reused by partners and other distributors around the world via either Media Exchange or ZenMaster, and then it's also able to be reflected back into the venue or back onto mobile devices in really low latencies.
Yeah. And I mean, for those of us who work inside the space, anything where we're doing contribution feeds, where we can actually do an immediate delivery of that content, especially in the venue, from a production environment, using mobile assets, it's brand new. And I really think what we did will give us kind of the tool set now to start exploring just different use cases and workflows around what's going on inside the space.
Well, I mean, particularly for us, that as we're looking at the outdoor games in venues that are not ours, where I don't necessarily control the same amount of dedicated bandwidth as I do in our existing buildings. Being able to lean on 5G in that scenario really opens the door to kind of doing some new and inventive things at those special events for us as well.
Which it absolutely scares me, because I don't know what he's going to come up with next. Right.
Yeah. Well, what was amazing to me was, I mean, there was no slicing involved. That was public 5G, and there were a few people at NAB on their phones at the time. So that was a pretty impressive proof point there too.
Yeah, I mean, it was impressive that they were, the folks that were switching and producing the graphics for the show are sitting there with about 50 people standing behind them, all gabbing and watching on their phones, and somehow they managed to be not distracted by that entirely.
And competing with whoever was using their phones, just in general.
Yeah, just in general,
right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, it's a wonderful proof point, right? That we can actually do something as complex as that, right? Not only produce it, but deliver a program feed in a pretty dense environment. When you think what's going on just in general on a show
floor. Yeah,
I
mean, I think plenty of people have experiences of bad cell phone coverage at trade shows.
Well, we have trouble in our booth at NAB, so I can imagine what everybody else is doing. On the business side, can you expand on that a little bit? Just kind of the what you can do when you have everything on the edge and when you have kind of one feed that rules all?
I mean, really, we syndicate our feeds, through the cloud to, all of the cable head ends. So we've got linear providers that are now being fed via cloud-based IP stream. I've got an international partner that's handling international streaming that's taking those same feeds. I'm producing, several different streaming formats for both cutting highlights of the game and for, providing to our own kind of toolkit, because internally we obviously watch our games quite a bit and log quite a bit of additional information that we won't get into, for various reasons. But there are so many use cases for all of these video feeds, and they just keep exploding. And the ability to kind of go and steer a single feed into the cloud and then be able to basically just orchestrate the distribution of it from there has really empowered us to kind of imagine new ways to distribute feeds, new ways to decorate them, and then subsequently distribute them. And really what being able to get these a single feed into the cloud has meant is that I can now focus my innovation efforts on what do I want to do with that feed? How do I want to decorate it? What kind of renditions do I want to make of that feed to give fans different views of the game, to start diversifying our content in a way that reacts to the generational change in the way people consume media, right? And so that we're not just addressing the traditional hockey fan that's linearly been consuming the game, watching the single stream on TV, but we're also able to start thinking about, hey, I'm going to provide alternate broadcasts, or I'm going to provide fans with the tools to wrap the broadcast in our data and to pick which of our data they want to wrap it in, and really just start to be able to really get fans to engage more heavily with NHL content than just a lean back and watch on TV kind of experience.
Yeah, for those of us who have been traditional broadcasters, we've been in this industry a very long time, and you had linear, right? You had this one shelf to feed. But now, the concept around a universal source, right, which is really what it is, I can start addressing different, platforms, the fragmentation of the audiences that are going on, different iterations, different editions, et cetera. And we're just continuing to see, especially with the new platforms, where the eyeballs are headed. It just gives us more of the power to be able to address, and not only address in kind of a long-term strategy, but almost immediately, hey, we got a new taker who wants to have that game tomorrow, but this is the encode that's required.
Yeah, that's certainly the super powerful thing about that. If somebody calls me up and says, hey, I need a feed from the game, I lost my fiber line or whatever,
Here it is.
Okay,
here's the URL.
Here's an entitlement. Give me your AWS account number, and I'll have it up in 15 minutes. It's that powerful.
That's been amazing to me to watch it working with the NHL for the last couple of years, is how dynamic that is, and how close to the game people are making a decision what they're going to take or not take.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even beyond that, I was just thinking, in addition to just producing the game and the officiation that has to go on, right? So there's, in the background, in addition to the product that you're putting out, there's a lot of other things happening. But also, we're all, when I get behind the scenes and we're talking to, you folks and a number of other leagues and teams, there's social media, there's players, there's a whole nother ecosystem that sits behind it that's generating content that's NHL game related as part of.
The part and parcel of this whole thing is when we started on our kind of live cloud production adventure last summer, really, right. And we started actually switching games in the cloud. And we did it behind kind of closed doors quite a few times. And what we started to realize is that there are so many knock-on effects to that. And that, so like if I'm shipping 12 ISO feeds into the cloud so that I can produce a game broadcast, right? In the cloud, it's easy for me to have 12 channels of replay. Additionally, I have every other game that's happening that night already getting transmitted into the cloud for various reasons. So I also have a replay system that has access to every other game going on at the same time. And that's something you can't have in a broadcast truck.
Right.
And what that kind of led us to see is that...
And in disparate broadcast trucks.
Well, we can actually revolutionize our entire highlights process as well and start flattening that into... Because, in many companies, you've got a social media highlights person, and you have a a digital highlights person, and you have a broadcast highlights person, and and then there's footage licensing that's kind of producing requested highlights for rights holders and things like that. And you start to see this ecosystem where I can actually I can have one operator basically produce all of those packages out of the same replay system with like 3 or 4 times the number of angles as the average guy in the truck has, because most trucks are still shipping with an EVS that has 4 channels of record and 2 channels of play out, and that's really just an economics thing, right?
Yeah.
But the economics of spinning up that many replay channels in the cloud is great comparatively, right? And so I have all of those ISO feeds, but I also have the ability to start using automated processes to generate selects out of those feeds, and then feed my archive with that content, and then and make those enhanced clips available to people that want them for footage licensing or for their show the next day or whatever, and I can make those available in my archive in minutes. Previously, we would have melts to share with people the next morning. And the idea that you can download a full melt package of that game that about 15 minutes later and have multiple people consume it out of our content portal is pretty amazing.
Right. So, and you're building up to something I was going to ask you anyways, which is kind of in the media and in the sports world, the TCO analysis seems to me to be mostly superficial, kind of looking at the obvious costs, but not looking at all the other benefits. I mean, how
Yeah, I think, and that's always been a challenge of mine is when we go through our budget cycle on a yearly basis, it's very much you're very much focused on, what is this costing me, rather as opposed to what is it getting me. And so my job is to basically make that translation for our business leaders so that they understand that, well, we're going to spend more money doing this, but we get these following knock-on effects that I think long-term save us quite a bunch of money and make us better. And really, ultimately, from the ownership on down, everybody has the same goal at the NHL, and that is to grow the game. Right. And we want to engage with our fans, and we want to give them what they want to see.
Right. Tim, if you mentioned earlier that this kind of gives you a framework.
Yep.
to do other things, and I think it probably gives Grant a framework to do other things too. Give me an idea of what some of those other things might be, or maybe some of those things that have already been done.
So I think we're looking at, my team's very specifically, we're looking at different piece parts of this. I do think, ultimately, you're not going to have a remote production team sitting at home actually doing it. Maybe they're at some centralized facility. So I think the stack, we can start to apply different tool sets. And the reason I bring that up is that you have to kind of look at not necessarily doing all of the NHL games in the typical season, but those pop-up events, right? How are we doing those which are uniquely different, that have kind of very specific infrastructure challenges? I also think you're going to start seeing, drop into tiers, right? So get into, the minor league sports, or getting into anything that looks like a D1, D2, high school, all the way down, where all of a sudden these tools are going to democratize being able to be a content creator, which we know in general the entire ecosystem that's out there is already somewhat democratized, and we have this content creation drive that's happening. So that's one kind of, certainly aspect of where these tools will start to get redeployed and be more powerful. But I also think that what we did in terms of the transcode and being able to drive a super low latency product to a mobile device in about a second, which is unheard of, now starts opening up a whole nother layer of transactions that can start to occur, right? So, look, we're looking at and saying the reality when you think about gaming and any gambling that's going on, whatever it is, or even
in venue, yeah.
In venue, out of venue. I mean, the reality is that if you want to do in-game betting, you are limited to, and you want to do very specific in-game betting, you are limited really to the latency that you, really in the venue, right? So maybe it's 30, 40, 50,000.
To be honest, you're limited to the latency of the data.
Yeah.
Right? So the data that's being used to create odds on a given prop bet essentially is coming from us as well, right?
Yep.
Ultimately. But the latency of that data is very low, right? And you've got to do two things. You've got to beat the latency of our official statistical data, but you also have to beat the guy that works for FanDuel that's sitting in the stands with a cell phone, kind of like live logging the game, right? So you got to beat that guy as well, and you really have to be, so round trip for stats to an odds maker, and then then odds coming back. You're sub 500 milliseconds for sure.
Yeah.
And so you need that video feed in venue to be sub 500 milliseconds if you could do it.
And then now with this technology, just given the way, especially the way our architecture is, right, where we have these 5G edge nodes that are all around the country, and because they're all connected, the experience that we had on the floor is not going to be that different if you're picking up the game in New York on a mobile device or you're picking up the game in LA. It may add a couple of milliseconds, but it's not significant. And so now you've got this ecosystem where I can reach audiences outside the venue to do those in-game bets. So, I went from, who's going to win the game or who's going to win the period to, is that next puck drop?
Yeah, who's winning the face-off?
Who's winning? Right, exactly. Yeah. Or was that a penalty?
Is there a goal going to be scored on this power play, or
And then when you start to think beyond that, because I can do that low latency transactional data overlay, what else does that mean? And I think I know Grant is enthusiastic about growing the sports, but now if I can put data and create an experience, not a gambling experience, but something, a gamification of it for kids.
Sure.
To learn the sport. If I can do different iterations to continue to challenge and build new product, which I couldn't do before because I was limited by the latency of the video, well, now I've got something really interesting. I've got a full toolkit that I can start playing around with, which I think when Grant, he had shared with me, when Grant started to do this, when we started to do this and we saw it was working, I think there was also a pause moment. It's like, oh, this is really going to be bad because I'm going to have to do all this other work now. They're going to do pop-up games over here. We're going to have to do this over there.
Not bad, just a challenge.
Just a challenge, right? A welcome challenge.
I mean, the other really important thing about this for us really was we're in the process working with Verizon very closely to install private wireless networks in all of our buildings for our coaching and player-centric video on the benches for the actual competition, right?
Right.
And so it was super important to us to really hone in on what our wireless toolkit was capable of, and how we were going to use it so that we could really identify the best way to set up those apps on the benches that the coaches and officials and the players are using to watch video in game and make game time decisions on. Right. So very much it extends all the way to the game being played on the ice at on
health and
night
safety.
in and night out. It is that is a super important part of what I do and what I've done for a long time at the NHL is really being able to super serve our officiating groups and the hockey ops groups so that we are sure that a goal is a goal, and we make the right call as much as humanly possible.
It's interesting what might pop up by necessity too, and this was during COVID. But do you want to talk about kind of the iPhone in the rink for officiating that was done during COVID?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we did do some playing around with taking iPhones and actually feeding 6G straight from iPhones into the cloud. That there was more of an Apple limitation as far as variable frame rate on the iPhone that caused a little bit of a problem there. It was more of a hiccup. It wasn't a problem. But that was a very interesting thing because you could start to see, well, hey, I could have, fan user-generated camera angles, and I could actually reward fans that produce good footage.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that was super interesting. I think there's a lot of interesting use cases with iPhone cameras
And they're just getting better.
in venues. There's certainly a lot of interesting things you could do there.
Yeah.
And certainly leveraging Verizon's network for that is super important to us as well.
Yeah.
And I think if we expand a little bit on that, right? So, I mean, the first kind of cut that we're doing on the private network is really about officiation and health and safety and integrity of the game, right? But once you start stacking on top of that, right? You know, when you think about, and we deal with it all the time, the amount of RF that's going on inside these venues, the amount of spectrum that's being consumed across not only all the venue workflows or the game workflows, but then even in general the public, you know, what they're doing. So when you have that private network, and we can start now actually doing unique camera angles, you know, private network cameras that are isolated from everything else, not competing with any other streaming services, not competing with any other spectrum. Well, now we can actually start to deliver a unique experience inside the venue, or a different experience for a loyal fan, or a different experience on the, you know, on a mobile device, or however we want to frame it. It starts to kick open a lot of more opportunities to just reimagine the experience, and then how powerful low latency video and the complementing that with data all of a sudden creates now, you know, this new opportunity to create several new products. Right. So we're excited about, you know, especially a partner like NHL, where, you know, and guys, you know, Zixi and all the folks that are out there that are are part of this ecosystem, right, just to be able to start bringing these tool sets together and seeing what we can create.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we want to set the content creators free.
Let them loose.
Right.
To really be able to leverage kind of all of the different and diverse viewpoints and diverse kind of ways of seeing our game, so that we start meeting the audience where it is.
Right. Yeah. And that's always evolving. So you've got to always be ahead of the curve, trying new things, and it's got to be very flexible, easy to do, and then change if it's not exactly what you want, right?
And if you think over the past 5 years, I mean, it's kind of fascinating to think about just innovation in general, right? As broadcasters that started in a mass media distribution world where we led what technology was going to be deployed. And now, because the technology is so advanced, as an innovator, you can't sit back and wait whether or not that particular technology is actually going to be adopted. You have to be there in the trenches, in the forefront, working, because your audience is moving everywhere. And whatever platform you're building or working with may be obsolete in 6 months. Right? So you've always got to be practicing. You've always got to be taking that on.
I always take the tack where I'm going to get behind something and run it out and see where right, we can see how good we can make it, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to encourage other people to take the same journey. And really, it's about making good choices for who your partners are, but also embracing, making your partners better partners for other people.
Right. Yep.
And making it, making other people understand like how much power we can get out of a given piece of technology and how we use it.
Yeah. And Grant has been, just in sports in general.
Absolutely.
He's just one of these guys that walks. He absolutely, and I appreciate the friendship and the way we've really started to work together. But he's one who's eager to get out there. He is a willing, participant in let's drive new innovation. Let's see what happens. And not everybody is.
We've seen that with the NHL. Grant's always out there. And started with Grant, and now we're doing the Major League Baseball, and we're doing Major League Soccer, and we just did our first agreement with the NFL, and now we're moving NBA content to Amazon, and all of a sudden it's a lot of people are really getting into the IP side of it, and I think once we harden all the 5G stuff, I think they'll follow as well.
Yeah, and I get a lot of calls from from folks at other leagues going, hey, tell me about what your guys are doing with Zixi, and because when we started,
and Verizon.
Yeah,
And
and
Verizon.
Verizon. Yeah.
Is there- keep on
You know,
plugging.
I was getting there.
Okay, sorry.
Well, you know, that was a different story, but but ultimately, you know, we view each other as peers on the technical side of the
Yeah.
leagues,
Yeah.
and certainly if they have something that they're working on, I always want to hear about it too, you know,
Yeah.
and so I'm not always the receiver on that call, you know,
Of
but
course.
generally speaking, you know, I think when I make an infrastructure choice, I like to go and get kind of some peer consensus a little bit, or build some peer consensus, because I feel, you know, that it's how I make you guys stronger and better partners for some of our peers in the sports business,
Yep.
and you know the larger broadcast business as well. But it's also how I make interacting with all of the different providers that I'm distributing feeds to easier.
Right.
And so there's an ulterior motive there, right? You know, certainly I don't want to have to make bespoke choices so that I can feed all of these different providers if I can do it in a very common way, you know.
Yeah.
So when we started handing out linear feeds last year to power our cable center ice package, there's a lot of providers that are really struggling to get off of satellite and embrace software-defined video, right? And really, where we're at is, you need a new skill set in those environments, and it's not a skill set that the traditional linear distributor like a DirecTV or a Dish or In Demand or any of the other cable head ends. It's not something linear distributors are. It's not one of their strong suits. Software development and things like that are not their strong suit. And so really, it's about trying to make it as easy as possible for them too.
Yeah.
And getting them to embrace kind of a future where you're not searching for a satellite that's on the horizon that you can't see. Particularly, telling when we're playing, Stanley Cup games in Edmonton and getting a satellite signal out of Edmonton is very difficult because of its geographic position.
Yeah.
So traditionally that was always, we're going to book some occasional fiber or whatever, and not having to have this big bureaucracy internally that's going out and randomly booking fiber for certain games and trying to backfill feeds that a certain provider like a DirecTV can't acquire for one reason or another, and just being able to really kind of make that a much easier process for us, so that I have a common location where all of these people can come and pick up these feeds, and we've been really trying to innovate about making that common platform as comfortable an environment for those takers as we can.
Exactly. And we work very hard to try and abstract the complexity from that process, and we do see that market, shifting over time. But it's a transition. It's a journey. So this didn't happen overnight either. So we've been working with Verizon since 2020 in the lab at first.
Yep.
And then, so this has been at least a 4-year journey of what is the art of the possible and what works and what doesn't work, and how does Zixi and our Zen Master platform, what do we need to do to make this optimized and the lowest latency and transcode to the lowest latency? Maybe you want to take just a couple minutes and talk about some of the things that we were doing along that journey, some of the Bloomberg stuff, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, well, if we go back, I mean, the history really started with us playing in the lab around Bloomberg, right? And doing both the electronic news gathering, but probably more importantly, and the low latency application delivery of that content.
Yeah, because they really care about latency too, right? Financial news, right?
Yeah. And we
Talk
really
about betting.
we really started to look at. It is really at the end of the day. It's just another gambling feed, just with a better wrapper. But we were really looking at a more non-traditional delivery of their live linear out to MSOs and cable operators, which was kind of the first project that we proved it. We sat there. We took a live feed from the master control facility in New York City. We routed it down all over our infrastructure, down to our superhead end for Fios, brought it back into New York Metro, and delivered it to set-top boxes in sub 200 milliseconds. So that was from glass to glass, sub 200 milliseconds. We knew it worked.
And that ran on the Fios network for 40 days, 30 days?
Yep. Yeah.
So
flawlessly.
Without flaws.
Yeah.
Flawlessly. And what it started to do is they started to give us a different vision, and that may have not been, as part of that project, the most ideal use case for those tools, right, or that spectrum. But what it gave us is a point of view around, okay, we can really deliver content, we can deliver linear feed of content to any endpoint using our ecosystem, right? So now that opens up just a different way of transmission. But what we really started to focus in on, which is where we were able to apply at the NHL, was then taking that same universal source and then delivering it into mobile devices. So now we were doing the same thing. We were delivering the live video stream to mobile devices in that sub 1 second. And especially for Bloomberg, when I start to look at that live linear, and I'm 7 to 10 seconds ahead of, on a mobile device, what anybody's watching that news at their kind of traditional environment, and I introduce a trading platform or some other transactional opportunity, I've now given that trader or that subscriber a 7 to 10 second advantage over anybody else. And so now those types of things start opening up new ways or new doors or new opportunities for different products, which we folded right into the same application here in terms of making it in terms of delivering that live linear video over a mobile device.
Yeah,
and now have a different experience.
Well, there's so much work to be done on the front end of this to really set the stage for being successful in this.
Yeah.
And really that comes down to being able to orchestrate the cloud and being able to orchestrate, ZenMaster and all the way down to our encode layer in the arenas, and being able to also orchestrate that touch on the edge and the HLS encode coming back and the connection of those edge feeds through the wavelength zone into the cloud resources where we're using them. Right. And so that work really consumes a lot of the kind of first year or so of thinking about this problem. And you come out of it encouraged that this is going to work.
Right.
But also knowing that, there's still, a proof point coming. And so you've got to be able to actually get to the point where you're pressing a software button and you're seeing everything just kind of happen.
I can build, our teams, we can build pretty much anything, right? We can put the parts together. But can I deliver a quality of service 24/7, 365 on board, put an operational layer around it, harden the architecture, really do what needs to be done when you're an enterprise organization like us and we're delivering to a large population? That's a little different. Because I can make something work today, but to make it work every day, you have to have a different mindset.
It's got to be bulletproof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it's from my perspective, it's got to work 1,500 times, at least.
Yeah, at least. Yeah. What's the next kind of exciting thing you're seeing out there that is going to really change what happens at the NHL?
I think there's a couple. I mean, one of the things that I'm really kind of laser focused right now is 8K, higher resolutions, and really building out the ability to create cropped virtual angles of anything that happens on the ice, and be able to really start playing around with how we package that.
You're skipping 4K, right? Just going right to 8K.
Well, I mean, I don't skip 4K. I have a lot of 4K feeds, but when they're not all 4K, it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to compose something valuable from kind of disparate components. Whereas if I have an 8K feed, I know that I can spit out 1080p 60 HDR off of that all day long,
Right.
and that it's going to look amazing, and there's potentially offers fans, a customized way to stylize the broadcast as well. So you start to see, hey, I want a broadcast that's really focusing more on defense than offense.
Right.
Somebody might want that.
Yep.
Or a broadcast that's really goaltender centric, right? There's just a lot of possibilities there. And I think we've always, we're always chasing on video the experience that we get when we see a game in person. And there's really no sporting event, in my opinion, that beats hockey live.
Yeah.
It's an amazing sport to see live, and television has not always done it justice. Certainly,
Yep.
The advent of HD helped our game quite a bit on television, but that's a while ago, and
Time for change. Yeah.
yeah, and certainly I know that I have to control what I can control, right? And rights holders pay a lot of money to broadcast our games, and I'm certainly not going to tell them how to do that. But if I think I have something better, I'm gonna work hard to show them that you could be doing something different.
So the move to IP contribution and distribution, when you think about it, I think most of the industry is already there. It's happening. It's not really a question, but there's still people who don't, but still think satellite's where you need to go. And satellite serves a purpose for a lot of things, but you get into 4K, 8K, it's not even an option anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing that you should be added to the writing on the wall, so to speak. Which is that satellite is going to get to a point where you're needing multiple transponders for a single channel because of resolution.
Right.
And it's just. It's not going to be,
math, right?
It's just not going to be as cost effective as IP transmission.
Right.
There were days, years ago where, a venue would have, a couple hundred megs of internet and they thought they had it good, and then they would be packet shaping connections, like sub connections down to people that were leasing them for events at like 20, 30 megabits for a lot of money.
Right.
And certainly for them it was seen as a revenue stream, but 200 megabits costs nothing these days.
Right.
I would argue that most people wouldn't even provision that little. So you'd end up with a scenario where, people have gigabit internet, you use it.
Yeah. Exactly. So Tim, we got a little less than a minute. What's the next big thing for you guys?
I think certainly we're looking a lot deeper into distribution architecture, right? We believe very firmly the satellite architecture today is not going to serve the what's going on in terms of the ecosystem. We are seeing now the comfort level continue to grow around IP as a transport for distribution, right? So that's high on our list. And then when I think about the contribution side, especially the mobile device side, I think we are seeing a lot more pickup in IoT data that is integrated into the game, so you can create an entirely different experience. And I think if you look at like an F1 and you see what they do even in the live event, or a NASCAR, what they're doing in live events, where you're getting not only the activity that's going on, but you're also getting a lot more content that you can dig a little bit deeper in. And I just feel like, to your point earlier, lean back is fine for a portion of this population, but I think the more data that you can provide when you're capturing those opportunities, that becomes an entirely new product, and I think we are seeing how we can help now transform those experiences so you have a full palette to deliver multiple iterations of the same content, and depending on either the platform or the user's preferences, now I can deliver a storytell that's very different. And I think we're seeing more and more of that because they're getting comfortable with it. Yeah. And probably even more importantly, because of the 5G spectrum, really is that vehicle for that super low latency and alignment with the video. So, we're excited about what that means.
Okay. Well, awesome. Well, we're out of time. Thank you both.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.